is how to fix mistakes in your knitting. There's two different methods that we'll look at. One is for when you have a mistake that's close to where you are in your project still, and then another one that is for mistakes that are way further back. So let's have a look here. So I've made up a little sample here, and right away there's one big issue that you can see there, and then I've also done another little one up closer here. So mostly the sample is in stockinette, so I've knit one way and then purled back so that all we see are knit stitches. But up at the top here in my last row that's on my needle, I've done one purl. So if I continued knitting up, then that would really show. It would sort of jump out at you as having that little bump there instead of a smooth knit stitch. So we'll have a look at how to fix both of those. So what's going on here with this bigger one that you can see is that I actually dropped a stitch here. So it's quite a noticeable problem. It's making, well, some holes, and this loop that you can see here is actually the live stitch that should have been still all the way up, carried up through, knit along, and still up on the needle there. So if I was to count my stitches, the ones that I have on my needle now, there would be one less than what I originally had cast on there. So definitely a problem. It's if it's left and not dealt with, it will actually unravel all the way back down to the start. So we definitely need to fix that one. And then this other little purl one we'll have a look at too. So in the beginning, when you're getting started knitting, it doesn't even really matter what happened because you may not know. So trying to figure it out is not really super important, because what we're going to do is just go back and undo it all anyways and get you back to a place where you have just good solid work and you can just continue on from there. So don't worry too much about that. But you can try to have a look and figure it out if you want. In some things it will matter more when you get into more complicated patterns, but for now it's not a big deal. So the first method that we're going to use is for mistakes that are close to where you still are in your work. And what this first one is called is Tink. And it's called that because it's knit backwards. So what we're actually going to be doing is knitting backwards or undoing our stitches. So this is, of the two methods, this is sort of the more tedious and time consuming, because we're going to actually go into each stitch and undo it and get it back onto the other needle. So you wouldn't want to do that for something that's further down, because it would take a really long time to undo each stitch in all of those rows. So we'll have a look at the other method in a second here. So for the first one, what we're going to do is just everything is backwards from how it would usually be when you would be knitting. Usually you'd have your work in your left hand, empty needle in the right, taking the stitches from the left to the right. And so we're just going to reverse that. Take the work, undo it, put it back on the left needle, and continue on. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be undoing these knit stitches. So we're just going to go into the stitch below the one on the needle, and sometimes it's a bit hard to know, but you can sort of see, give it a little test, see if that's where the yarn's pulling through. And then once you have it back on the left needle, we're just going to let that loop drop off and then just pull it out. And we're just going to do that all the way back along until we get back to that little purl mistake stitch. So just going in underneath there, making sure you get into the whole stitch and you're not splitting it, you're not getting more than the stitch. You'll find out pretty quickly because it won't want to undo easily if you've picked up more than what you should or not quite the right thing. It should go pretty smoothly if you've got the right part of the stitch. So I'm just going through left to right, not twisting. Okay, just a couple more here till we get back to that stitch. Okay, and now now, so what's happening here is that because this one actually was a purl stitch, now the yarn is wanting to sit in the front, which is how we purl. So we're just going to do that, let that happen, and then we're going to undo this purl stitch. So a little bit different. Rather than going into the back like I was, now I'm going to come into that purl stitch from the front and undo that. Okay. And then now that that's undone, we've just got our nice stockinette back on there. They're all knit stitches. And so we would be ready just to continue on. Oops. Just to continue on there from that point. But because in this little sample, we've got this other issue that we need to fix up. So what we're going to do now, this second technique is for something that has happened further back in your work, and we're gonna want to get all the way back there to fix it. So this one is a little bit scarier because we're actually going to take all of the stitches off of the needles. So now we won't have them on. It's going to be a little bit trickier to get them back, but we're going to go ahead and pull the needles right out. Okay. So now we're just going to actually unravel this work back to the point where we need to fix the problem. So this technique is called frog, and it's because we're just going to rip out the stitches, ribbit, rip. So it's frogging. And so I'm just going to keep pulling out. What I like to do is go back until about the row just before the problem, if I can tell where that is. And then I like to tink that last row just because it prevents a few other problems from happening, but I'll show you both ways. So you can see it comes undone nice and easy. It's kind of fun, but also kind of terrifying. Okay, so we'll go back again here so you can see we're getting down closer to where that loose loop is. Okay, so now I'm into that row. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up these ones that I've pulled out, and I'll sort of show you both things here at once. So to pick these up now, I want to go from left to right without twisting the stitches, which is hard to know. So what we want is for, in this loop, that one's tough. In the loop, we want to have the right leg of the loop, the right side of the loop at the front. Okay? So it's a little bit tricky, and that's why I don't like to do it this way, because it's tricky. And then if your stitches get twisted. And then the other thing that can happen is what just happened to me here is that this stitch has pulled out now. So I've actually dropped this stitch down another one again. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to try tinking back the other way again. Okay, so I'm just going to pull out till I get back to the start of this row. And then we'll just undo these as we go. So now I'm going to undo each stitch just like I did up above when we were just going back to that purl stitch. But this way I don't have to worry about how I'm putting the stitch on there. I'm just going from left to right into that purl bump at the back of each stitch. It's a little bit hard to see, but it gets easier with practice. And again, you want to make sure that you're not splitting the yarn at all, that you're actually getting right into that stitch. Okay, I'll just get all the way back. Okay, so now I've undone that row, and you can see that that drop stitch is gone now because we've undone all the way down to where it had unraveled to. So now we've just got good work back on there, ready to go again with our knitting. One thing that you do want to do as you're knitting is to check your work. Have a look at your work fairly often, because that's when you'll catch those mistakes right away and you won't have to do a whole bunch of frogging or a whole bunch of unraveling, because that's pretty discouraging at the start. So have a look pretty often, maybe even counting your stitches if you're doing something complicated, just to make sure that you still have the right number on there. But keep checking on it, and then you'll catch things sooner, and then they're easier to fix. So that's 2 ways of fixing mistakes in your knitting.